Cleaned.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Mr Speaker, it's a little bit like Groundhog Day, very strong sense of deja vu, yet again standing to speak to prisoner and victim, the latest iteration of this legislation. We've had indeed it has, yes, that'll be part of the problem, I'm sure. This is a piece of legislation that was first put into place in 2005 as a stopgap measure, as a response to the political necessities of the time, perhaps, in order to endeavour to placate, perhaps, a very rowdy minority in the public who are objecting to some of the actions that are being taken. Mr Goff, who just spoke, and I must say I'm somewhat puzzled to hear such powerful objections from the Labor side to this legislation. I look forward to them switching their vote and actually opposing this legislation in line with the speeches they are making. This legislation has not worked. It has not been effective in returning value to victims, and fundamentally it denies human rights. It is an abrogation of human rights. It is not acceptable in a country that, as we've heard this morning, rates very highly in terms of our commitment to the rule of law, who rates ourselves as being a country where corruption is not seen and where we respect and honour everybody's human rights. This legislation is an offence to that, and we will continue to oppose it. The fundamental intention of this legislation is to deny restitution to people whose human rights, whose basic rights may be abused while they are in the custody of the state. And we have seen instances of that, where indeed prisoners, inmates were actually tortured over extended periods under the behaviour management regime that led to the Taunoa proceedings. And the court found very clearly, they made very strong rulings, that the treatment of those men was absolutely unacceptable in a country that calls itself civilised and a country that commits to human rights. It is unacceptable, and this legislation is equally unacceptable. The notion that the public was demanding that victims, that prisoners, that inmates, people who have offended, ought not to receive any restitution, I think is not based on particularly strong evidence. It's clear that there was a very punitive approach in the air in the mid-2000s, and to some extent that still prevails. But you only have to scratch just an inch below the surface in talking to members of the public and talking to NGOs and reading the public pulse. People are more intelligent than that. They understand that people do not lose their human rights simply because they have offended and because they have been imprisoned. If we are truly committed to that, then everybody should be entitled to restitution if their rights are abused while they are as probably the most vulnerable people in our society, those who are in the custody and, if I use the word loosely, the care of the state. Mr Burrows, the Minister, in introducing this reading, pointed out that we have a solution available to us if we don't want to see inmates receiving compensation for abuse. Let's create an environment where those abuses will not occur. It really is as simple as that. We don't need this particularly vicious piece of legislation. We simply need to ensure that our prison system is run in a humane manner, that is run in a just manner, that human rights are respected and maintained, that even minor transgressions of human rights are not accepted, so that this sort of legislation need never be triggered. It is not beyond our wit to create a correction system where prisoners' rights are protected and maintained. Sir, I have to acknowledge that there is some good work being done in the corrections system, in the corrections area. The new CEO, Ray Smith, or not so new now, is working very hard to change the culture, and he is having some success in that. But he is trying to steer a very cumbersome, very complex, very slow-moving vessel, trying to take it to a better place. And we are nowhere near there yet, I would have to say. And I think we only need to look at some recent examples. A comment a senior corrections officer is quoted today in one of the papers, I think the Dominion, saying that the management of maximum security prisoners is constantly evolving to better assist prisoners towards a crime-free future. And I'm afraid that's rather an idealistic and simply an unsustainable proposition, given, for example, what is currently happening in D Block, the maximum security block at Perimeroma at Auckland Prison, where for a period of some 3 months, over this very hot summer we've had. Prisoners in the maximum security block were denied outdoor exercise. For 3 months, those men did not see fresh air, did not get in the fresh air, did not get sunshine on them. Imagine what that does to people's mental and physical health, being denied that minimum requirement of simply 1 hour in the fresh air for over 3 months. That is completely unacceptable. What is that going to do to their attitude, to their level of tension, the level of stress within that already fairly volatile environment that is a maximum security wing? As we speak, for the last 6 or 8 weeks, prisoners in D Block have been washing their clothes in buckets because the laundry facilities have been removed and they have not yet been replaced with new laundry facilities. If they send their laundry to other wings, only half of it comes back, and that's been confirmed by the acting manager of the prison. They do not have that fundamental, very basic and simple assurance that their personal property will actually be secure and returned to them. As a result, we had an entirely unsatisfactory situation where prisoners are endeavouring to clean their clothes and their bedding in buckets of water without so much as soap or soap powder being issued to them. That is an unacceptable situation in the 21st century. Are we trying to stir up more stress in our prisons? Are we trying to increase the frustration levels of these already volatile men by depriving them of those basic human dignities of clean laundry, a breath of fresh air for 1 hour out of every 24? Are we deliberately trying to create situations where we will get outbursts of violence in our prisons? Mr. Kim Workman, who was making submissions to the Select Committee in February this year, a man with extraordinary depth and range of knowledge about our prison systems, he made the point that safe prisons prisons will be safe, made safe, when prisoners observe that they are being treated fairly and decently. Now, anybody that believes that our prisons are holiday camps clearly has never been inside one. Prisoners do not expect to be coddled. They know they're not there to enjoy themselves. They accept that. But prisoners also know what is reasonable, what is fair, and what the minimum legal requirements are, what the minimum requirements are in terms of human rights. And we are not meeting those requirements. A safe prison is one where prisoners feel that at least their basic humanity is recognised, they're being treated fairly, and that environment becomes safe. Mr. Workman went on to, and I'm paraphrasing him here, I'm not quoting him directly, but he made the point that we have a very poor culture, a very poor environment historically in our prisons, and that one day, if we don't do something to do better, that our prisons will blow up and we won't know what struck us. We are seeing already expressions of that. Over the last 12, 18 months, there have been 5 or 6 quite serious incidents in our prisons, at Rangipo, at Hawke's Bay, at Premeremo. These are becoming quite commonplace. The corrections response to the latest at Rangipo, for example, is actually to deny that it was a riot, despite the fact that 11 men were involved, 11 men were relocated. We're seeing these constant incidents, quite serious incidents occurring, and in large part because we are failing to create a safe, humane environment in our prison. This legislation that is being advanced today to embed this extraordinary proposition that prisoners should not be eligible for restitution if the state violates their human rights, even to the extent of physical abuse and torture, that nevertheless prisoners ought not to receive compensation for that. This legislation that we're making permanent today does nothing to make our prisons safer. It will do virtually nothing to protect or enhance the rights of victims. We need to have a comprehensive review of how can we assure that victims of crime in New Zealand are treated as well as we can treat them, that the offence against them is made good, that the emotional, the physical, the mental trauma they suffer is remedied to the extent that we can do that. This legislation does nothing. It is silent on that. There is no means in this legislation to protect victims beyond more than the most superficial perhaps way that could possibly be imagined. We need, as was promised and intended in 2005, to look at the rights of victims, remembering also that many of our offenders, many of the people in our prisons are themselves offended against, and that cycle of being the victim and being the offender is one we need to break. We need to address that, and we can do that by intervening intelligently, humanely and thoughtfully. Kia ora, Mr Speaker.
I call the Honourable Member Alfred Nairo. Kia ora.